Hi everybody, here's my short talk about programming style. These are some but not all of the elements of clean coding, so this is what I want you to pay attention to when you're coding from now on and to go back and revise in your Snake programs. So, the first is naming. My old college programming partner, Nick Lenham, always used to name his variables things like GWC1, and I'd say, Nick, what is GWC1? And Nick would say, Global World Coordinates 1, of course. And like, Nick, that's not good naming, Nick. So you always want to name your variables for the things they hold as full words. So don't say A equals H times W, say area equals height times width. And there's no, and it used to be like, you know, it's a pain to type long words, and I get that. But now in IntelliJ, you just have to type the first two letters of your word and hit tab and it will autocomplete, so there's no excuse for it anymore. You should use either camel case or underscores. Camel case is where you capitalize the first letter of every word and don't use spaces. Use of underscores is you just replace spaces with underscores. That's more common in Ruby programming. You could use either style you want, but don't mix the two. The last thing is that your method names should either be named after what the method does, so it should be a verb phrase, or after what the method returns, so it should be a noun phrase. And you might think that the method name alternating row seems fairly descriptive. That's probably good. But it's not really, because it doesn't tell me what it's actually doing. Is it checking alternating rows? Is it creating alternating rows? It's missing the verb in the verb phrase. So if you named it something like make alternating rows, that's a little bit more explicit, because now I know what it's doing. So verb phrases, noun phrases. Indentation. This is very shameful. Please don't turn in code that looks like this. Aside from being very shameful, it's going to confuse other people, and it's also going to confuse you, because programmers use those indentations to tell which lines of code are inside coding blocks, like which things are inside the if statement, which things are inside for loops. You can auto-indent in IntelliJ with Control-Alt-L, and please do. Oh yeah. Use of whitespace. This is pretty short, so don't try and cram everything together. This is a little bit better. You can see it spaced out. Looks nice. You don't need to like really space everything out. Like to me, this looks a little bit weirdly spaced out. Yes, this is a little bit subjective. Do your best. Like this is clearly pretty condensed in a hard to read way. This is a little easier to read. So your goal is readability. It used to be that a lot of people would say comment a lot of your code. The new thing is if you're naming your variables correctly, you shouldn't need a lot of comments. People refer to this as self-commenting code. So here, it's hard to tell what's happening, like what's S and what's A and why are we checking if A is less than 16. Instead, if you say like if state code equals Massachusetts and age is less than the Massachusetts driving age, like it's pretty clear what's going on there just based on the naming. So when should you comment? You should usually comment your methods in the way that we did in the summer homework. So put a block comment above it which says what the method does. If you have a variable or a parameter and it's not like blindingly obvious what it is based on its name, you could add a single line comment which explains it. And then the only other thing comments are for is if you have like really non-obvious sections of code where it's, you know, you're doing something that another programmer wouldn't immediately recognize the pattern for. And so then just quick short comment. Oh, that's the other thing is avoid redundant comments. So like beginners do this a lot. Increment the count. Well, any programmer can look and see that that's what's happening. Like this is adding one to the count. So you don't also need to say it in a comment. Okay, magic numbers. These are very bad. So what do I mean by magic number? Well, if you're not the programmer, you have no idea why 5 is so special in this code. If age is bigger than 5, then do something. Why 5? So 5 is kind of like a magic value in that sense. Like you know it works because it's there in the code, but like what's it all about? Nobody has any idea. So instead of using just numbers in the bare like that, you should create named constants at the top of your program. So you could say if age is greater than breeding age. and breeding age is defined to be 5 at the top. So now it's a lot more clear what that code's trying to do. Here, player move equals 0, not clear. Player move equals scissors. Now I know that like 0 was the code that I was using to mean scissors in my game of rock, paper, scissors. So this is much, much more readable. So avoid magic numbers. Up till now, I think maybe it's been review for you, or like hopefully you've heard at least most of those. This one you probably haven't heard of. Defensive coding. So let's pretend that you're making a game where you can win and lose money. So I've got a loop here. I'm saying as long as my money isn't 0, then presumably there's like a bunch of lines of code here that's about how the game works. So we play the game. And then if I won that round of the game, we add to my money. Otherwise, we subtract from my money. So this works because if I keep playing and I keep losing money, eventually my money hits 0, and then this loop stops being true and I exit. So what's fragile about this? Well, what if later on I decide that I want to include betting, maybe? So you could bet a certain amount of money, and then you'd either win that much or lose that much. So I go ahead and I say money plus equals bet size, and money minus equals bet size. It might not occur to me, especially if there's lots of lines of code, like up in here where the comment is, it might not occur to me that my original while loop isn't going to work anymore. But if my bet size was 5 and I had $4 left and I lose it, now my money is -1. But when it goes back to the top, my money does not equal 0. It's -1. So it will keep looping as if I hadn't just lost. So that's fragile. What it means when your code is fragile is when you make a change in one place, it will just break your code in other places in ways that are hard to predict. So defensive coding is about trying to protect against that fragility. So in this particular case, one of the things that we can do is just change it to say as long as the money is larger than or equal to 0. This might seem like overkill in the case where I'm only losing $1 at a time, but this is defensive coding. I'm defending against the future where I might change how the money works. Another thing that I could do for defensive coding, let's say it worked this way. So I'm allowed to leave off the curly braces here if I only have one statement inside my if. And let's say there's more code that happens here. I myself have done this. I've been programming quickly. I thought, oh, you know what? I want to do more than just add the money. I also want to like display some stuff, so display stats. So I do some other stuff, and I indent it in the right way. Well, guess what? This is not inside the if statement because I don't have any curly braces. And the indentation is fooling me. Really, this is going to run no matter what. So a lot of companies have in their style guide that you should just always have curly braces defining a code block, even if you only have one line of code inside the code block, because it's too easy to forget and try and add something inside your non-existent code block, and then that creates bugs. So that's another thing. Okay, this last one is the most important one. So I don't know if I mentioned it in this class, but in the other block I definitely did. It's generally considered bad practice to have a single method that's longer than 15 lines. Actually, different programmers will tell you a different number there, and if your parents are programmers, I'd be curious if you wanted to ask them and see what number they tell you. Some people say 30, some people say 8, but the idea is you want short methods because those are easier to debug and easier to read. So the way that you're going to make short methods is you're going to identify several lines that are doing a single logical thing. So here I'm noticing that these 4 lines are really just about getting a valid response, like hold or go. So instead of having those 4 lines, you can replace those 4 lines with a single method call to ask, hold, or roll. And that's what's inside this method, is those 4 lines. So I've made the method shorter. I've also made it a lot more readable because in this version, your eye goes past this and you're like, what's happening? Oh, we're checking to make sure they did the right thing. Here Here, you just say, oh, we're getting the user response, hold or roll, and now you keep reading. This is another part of, well, we'll come back to don't repeat yourself. We'll come back to removing or minimizing repeated code, because that's kind of a bigger topic. But I think that's it for the moment. So right now you're going to go back and you're going to look at your snake again and your partner's snake again, and you're going to think about all of these things: naming, indentation, white space, commenting, what was after that? No magic numbers, defensive coding, and the really big one, which is short methods. Figure out how to chunk your thing so that it really reads almost like English, because you're just reading down a short sequence of method calls that are named for what they do. Okay, good luck.